Hi, we are Daniel and Lara Kuhn, and we just want to share with you a little bit about how we were called to missions. For me, it started when I was just a little kid. At my church, we had programs that taught us about missions. Not many churches have them anymore, but every Wednesday night I would hear stories as a little bitty kid as I was growing up, I'd hear stories about missionaries. I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world to be a missionary. And, um, and then a little while later, I was about 14 years old, I went to a youth camp, a church camp, and there the pastor was speaking one night, I assume on call to ministry or call to mission, something like that. I can't even remember his sermon, but I distinctly remember responding to the invitation. And I felt God was calling me to missions, but at that moment, right then, right there, and that didn't make any sense to me. I had no idea how a 14-year-old could possibly do missions. But I told God, if that's what you want me to do, then I will do it. But you're going to have to show me how. And then that same week, my youth group is eating at a Hardee's, and this man walks up to our table. And he says, "My name is Walker Moore. I'm president of All Star Ministries. We send high school and college students overseas for short-term missions." And so my jaw hit the ground, and I told my youth leader, I just told God I would do this. And so the next summer, I went to Hungary, Budapest, Hungary, with 20 something other students and spent a month there doing street evangelism. And it changed my life. I went for the following 2 summers. And so by the time I was finishing high school, I was telling people that I was going to be a missionary. God was calling me to be a missionary. And then as I got to college, I began to doubt whether missions was what God was calling me to for various reasons. I was convinced I was called to ministry, but I didn't know about missions. And I decided that local church ministry is what God wanted me to do. And so that's after college, I went to seminary to prepare for local church ministry. And that's where I met my wife. And so Laura had some experience with missions too before we met.
Yeah, I had grown up in the church. Church was a happy place for me. And I loved God. I loved the Bible, and I wanted to obey God. And um, I remember being on a mission trip, and this was my first mission trip I'd gone on. And we went to, it was a youth group trip, and we went to Chicago and through Uptown Baptist Church. I remember that. And so we spent time there doing inner city ministry. And I was in middle school. I wasn't just bold, and I was still learning about life. And but I do remember specifically the impression that left on me was that I like this. That this is something I want. It was not so much a Laura, you're called to missions, but it was Lord, if you want me to do this, I'm willing. So I grew up in the church and continued to grow up in the church, and was active and passionate about sharing my faith through middle school and high school and college. And um, I remembered my brother was encouraging to me to consider going into children's ministry because I was really active in that in the church. And I thought, well, I prayed, and so I went into seminary, and that's where Daniel said we met. And yeah, I remember a chapel service. We I think there was an emphasis on international missions that week, and so we were engaged, and we both just started thinking maybe we should pursue missions. We both started talking about how we were both inclined to that as in our younger years before we knew each other. And so we started Daniel, I remember, was consulting with a professor of his about that.
Yeah, and for some reason, I can't remember the details there. We just decided not to pursue that.
Well, we weren't married,
Yeah,
so.
well, but anyway, so we ended up serving in several different churches in the Southeast. And then God put me in a position of being the missions pastor at a church. And I thought this was what all of these callings and desires and everything were coming together. Here's local church ministry and its missions. And so this must be what my calling was supposed to be. After serving that role for about 3 years, we were approached about going to the Dominican Republic to oversee a new work there. And so we prayed about that together, and we went and explored it, and we decided that God was in it. And And so we said yes. And so that's how we ended up on the mission field. We served 3 years in the Dominican Republic and then wanted to go work with unreached people groups. And so that's how we ended up in working with the Mixtecs in Mexico. So it's a lifelong calling. Going, God had been working on us since we were young, and just the fulfillment of that took a little while. I don't think I would say we were disobedient to anything, but it was just the timing was just, it wasn't for early years, but when the timing was right, God brought us on the mission field.
I think what I would say is our hearts were always open to
Yeah.
it. We were always willing. I do remember in seminary we were speaking to the professor, who was kind of a mentor to Daniel, and he said, "Well, get married first." We were engaged, and then once we got married, after you were still finishing seminary, and we became pregnant with twins, and so that kind of can interrupt life a little bit, plans, and so yeah, we raised our children, and you were working on staff, and we were faithful to where God was calling us. And like Daniel said, I think, I know for us, I think for a lot of people, it's in bits and pieces. It's like coming to Mexico. When we decided we were called to missions, it wasn't because we had Mexico on our hearts, on our minds. Some people do, and that's awesome. Praise God for that calling. But we didn't know where to go. We just went to the next step, and if God opened that door, we went to the next step, and here we are, and we can confidently say that we're exactly where God has called us to be, and that's where we want to be.
Yeah.